And here we are in our StreamNative UI. We're ready to deploy our instance and cluster. This is going to be a StreamNative BYOC Ursa cluster. If I go ahead and click the plus icon here for deploy BYOC, we'll call this Unity I1. Cloud connection is the connection from StreamNative into your cloud provider. I'll click the Ursa engine. For cluster location, here I'm going to call the cluster Unity C1. This ID is unique to this cluster. The cloud environment is the underlying resources that we've deployed into your BYOC cloud provider, and we're going to be deploying the cluster into these resources. Here I'm going to choose the storage location. For Unity, I'm going to be using the existing BYOC bucket. This is the bucket that is created from the cloud environment, and that's going to create an object in there specifically for this cluster. So this is the actual cluster object, and then the compaction folder is the specific data that's going to be in that Delta Lake or Iceberg format, depending on which integration you're using. So for us, it's going to be Delta Lake. And this is where we're going to have to use this full path to create the external location after the cluster is deployed in the Databricks catalog. I don't want to just store the data in Delta Lake or Iceberg. I want to actually use a catalog integration, and I want to use Unity. Here I need to have the catalog name. We were going to use training workspace and the default schema name. And then the URI here is the Databricks URI. I'm going to paste that in without the trailing /. And I'm going to create a new secret called Unity1, and I'm going to use that developer access credential that we had created earlier. Again, we also do support OAuth 2. It is supported in the UI now, not during this recording. And we have directions in the documentation on how to get that OAuth 2 key out of the Databricks UI. And I'll go ahead and click confirm. When you click deploy, it's actually not going to deploy the cluster yet, but it's going to try and connect into that Databricks Unity catalog. I'm going to go ahead and click continue, ours succeeded, and then I'm going to leave all of these cluster settings as the defaults, and this will be the smallest size, and it'll start deploying my BYOC cluster into that cloud environment with the connection to the Databricks Unity catalog enabled. Once this is deployed, we'll go ahead and test it out. And here we are in StreamNative UI again. The cluster is finished deploying. You can see here now that it is green. If you click on it and I go to configuration, you'll be able to see the Delta Lake format is used, the bucket. Again, we're going to be using the / compaction after this as the reference for our external location, but we're not quite there yet. And then for the catalog, we're going to use training workspace and default as the catalog and schema name. And then this is the URI, of course, to our Databricks workspace. I'm going to next configure my Kafka client to connect to the server and start publishing messages so we can view them over in Databricks. To do that, I'm going to click on my cluster name up here. This is the randomly generated one, but it's also known as Unity C1. Under the overview page, I need the Kafka service URL and the Kafka schema registry URL. Here in IntelliJ, if I look at my client.properties.schema file here, I am going to be publishing data to the Kafka schema topic. That's going to go into the public default tenant and namespace inside of StreamNative since we aren't specifying the tenant and namespace. I've also updated the Bootstrap server, and if I scroll down to the bottom here, I have the schema registry URL as well, to those to match the server that we just spun up. And then I'm using a OAuth 2 credential to get into my StreamNative cluster and the correct audience with the instance that I've just created. I am already publishing messages here. Let's go back to the StreamNative UI. Let's take a look at the topic that's created. And then I'm going to hop into S3 and show you what the buckets look like before we finally head over into Databricks to view the data through the Unity catalog. So here in the StreamNative UI, I've just clicked on the cluster name here to go to the cluster dashboard. You can either select your tenants up here or go to the tenants page, and then I'm going to click public. Again, you can select your namespace of default here, or just go to namespaces here and select default. Then when I go to topics, you'll see that there was a topic created called Kafka schema topic. Let's go ahead and look at that S3 bucket and the data that's stored for this cluster. So here we are in AWS S3, and I'm inside of that bucket that is created by the cloud environment. You can see that there's now an object in here corresponding to our cluster. If you go in there, you'll see both a storage and a compaction folder. If you've just created your cluster and haven't published any data to any topics, or it's just been a few minutes since you started publishing your first data, most likely you won't see the compaction folder, but you will see the storage folder. The storage folder is where data is initially stored, and it is very quickly written there so that you can acknowledge the data on your producer and say that, hey, the data is now safe, it's been stored into the bucket. The compaction folder is once it's been compacted into the Delta Lake or Iceberg format, Delta Lake for our instance, and then it'll be sorted by tenant and namespace, and then you'll find our topic in here. In here, you'll find the partitions in the Delta log folder, and in partitions, you'll see the Parquet files. So I'm going to go back to the compaction folder, go to Properties, and go ahead and copy this URI. So even if you click refresh in the catalog, you won't yet see any data in the training workspace default catalog and schema. We still need to create the external location. So if I go ahead and click the add data, add an external location, I'm going to go to manual, click next, and I'm just going to call this StreamNative integration. And for the URL, I'm going to put that full folder all the way up to the compaction folder. For the storage credential here, I'm going to use the workspace IAM role because we've already provided that permission into this bucket here earlier. And then I'm going to go ahead and click Create. I like to go ahead and click the Browse button here and make sure that I can see that data up to the Parquet files. And you'll notice that multiple Parquet files show up per minute. So that's for a topic that's producing quickly, you'll see that the data does show up a few times a minute into these Parquet files, which means that it would be visible inside of Databricks. If I go to Catalog and click Refresh here at the top and open up my training workspace and default, if everything's working correctly now, you'll see your new topic here show up. If you start publishing data to a new topic, it's a good idea to then look in the compaction folder in S3 to see if you see that tenant namespace topic name. You wouldn't expect anything to show up here in Databricks until that compaction process has run, and then you would be able to see it here. If I go ahead and click on this table, I'll be able to go to sample data, say select compute, and if you wait just a second or two, the data should start to show up here inside of Databricks. And here's our data that we were publishing. You'd also be able to see it through the SQL editor, and once I finished publishing my 10 million messages, I'd be able to do a count on the data in the SQL editor. You should be able to see that there were 10 million rows added into this table. If you're using OAuth 2, the permissions might be a little bit more complicated. You might need to explicitly add your user as being able to view the data inside of Databricks before you can query it here in the UI.